Welcome. This is Raoul Lowery Contreras, and this is the Contreras Report International Edition, 1 week before the election for the presidency of the United States of America. We'll discuss that later. We're going to talk today about long-range war. Yes, we'll discuss two international items today. The first, the still thundering war being waged on ground that I have walked on between Iran on the south, Russia in the north, and Turkey to the west. In 2 words, it's a tough neighborhood. When we finish talking about the long-range prospects of Armenia's war-making ability, we'll discuss a huge Mexican event, an arrest of one of Mexico's top officials in the entire presidency between 2012 and 2018. Item number 1, rumble in the mountains. The Caucasus Mountains. Headline from Great Britain's Daily Mail newspaper, quote, this was several days ago, quote, Yerevan says 772 Armenian soldiers and 36 civilians have been killed in the flare-up, unquote. That's statistics from days ago. By the time you see this, by the time this is seen, Armenian casualties will be over 1,000 and climbing, until there is an end to the combat. In the 26 days since fighting broke out on the 27th of September to today, when I'm taping this, Armenia has lost 34 soldiers a day. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has called on volunteers to fight on the Karabakh front line as it vowed there was no diplomatic solution to the conflict. Quote, everything that is diplomatically acceptable to the Armenian side is not acceptable to Azerbaijan anymore, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said that day that I read it. Let me translate that for you. Azerbaijan refuses to retreat to the pre-September 27th line of conflict, and it refuses to accept responsibility for the fighting that Armenia is responsible for, not in Azerbaijan's mind, but that the responsibility of Armenia was ruled by a unanimous decision of the European Court of Human Rights judges, all 15 of them in 2015. Reports of Azerbaijani strikes on Armenian territory are being made by foreign journalists covering the combat for the first time after extensive reporting of several missile attacks on Ganja, Azerbaijan's second largest city, miles from the combat in and around Nagorno-Karabakh. Moreover, Ganja is not a fortified military-based city. The Armenian missiles are aimed at a civilian population. If Armenian officers and army officers in Yerevan are telling the world 722 Armenian soldiers have died in faraway Nagorno-Karabakh hills and valleys in Azerbaijan, the real total is probably much, much higher. That's how propaganda works. That's how people losing a war work. That is why Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is asking for civilian volunteers. Civilians aren't the only people Pashinyan is asking for help. He sent his top people to Russia to ask for help. Russia, after all, is Armenia's best friend and sponsor. It rents 2 large military bases from Armenia, supplies trained border guards to guard Armenia's borders, it lends Armenia money to buy Russian weapons, and it provides Armenia with national air defenses. Russia turned away Pashinyan's request for help other than sending weaponry by flights through Iran. Without regard to how Russia might react, Pashinyan has sent a delegation to Brussels, Belgium, to talk to the top man at NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, the world's greatest alliance ever to protect freedom and liberty. Reports are that Pashinyan pledges to dump his alliance with Russia and membership in the Russian version of NATO to bring Armenia closer to Western Europe, all of which is part of NATO. Europe watchers are predicting that Pashinyan's Armenia will be severely punished by Russia for his not-so-hidden dumping of Russia. Reacting to Armenia's perfidy, to any possible negotiations for peace through diplomacy, and Azerbaijani presidential aid has accused Armenia's premier of disrespecting the international community. Why? For his recent call, Pashinyan's recent call on civilians to fight in the front against Azerbaijan in ongoing clashes to which Pashinyan says there is no diplomatic solution. Hikmet Hajiyev, assistant to Azerbaijani president, responded to statements by Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan that the conflict in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and its surrounding areas could not be resolved diplomatically. Repeat, the conflict cannot be resolved diplomatically. Arguing that these remarks once again demonstrated that Armenia was not interested at all in the peaceful resolution of the conflict, quote unquote, Hajiyev said Yerevan intended to continue occupying Azerbaijani territories. Okay, let's take Pashinyan for his word, especially his speech on August 5th, quote, Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia, period, unquote. So much for diplomatic negotiations. Can Armenia fight this war for more than a few weeks? No. A careful professional looks at Armenia and its population displays a national condition that shows a dying country, a disappearing country. The latest data from the World Bank shows the current population of Armenia has been experiencing constant decline since 1990. Its population is about 2.9 million. Its fertility rate is about 1.6. 1.6. Far below replacement level. Let me explain that. That's for a fertile woman, age 15 to, say, 40, is averaging right now, the rate is 1.6 per family. That's far below the replacement level, which is at a minimum 2. The population is slowly shrinking. The executive representative of the UN Population Fund, Sylvinar Hartunian, previously said that Armenia has already reached the demographic crisis and is gradually approaching depopulation. That is, the stage when the majority rate may exceed the birth rate, the mortality rate may exceed the birth rate. And that is happening as you hear and see this. The mortality rate, that's the number of people dying per 100,000, the mortality rate has been exceeding the birth rate throughout the country, according to an Armenian agency called civilnet.am. According to experts, this is large because now, this is a large problem because now the generation born in the 1990s in Armenia is entering the age of marriage. Accordingly, the generation of the 90s is 40% less numerous in numbers than those born in the 1980s. And this significantly affects the number of marriages and birth rates now. Moreover, more than 25% of the 1990s generation emigrated. They left Armenia. Quote, we should not forget migration. Over 1 million people have left Armenia, says Mr. Hartunian. The latest demographic data states that the Armenian population began to decline in 1992 during the war with Azerbaijan, but hit the lowest rate in 2019, a record low of 2.965 million. The number of people leaving Armenia has been increasing every year. As a result of mass immigration and difficult socioeconomic conditions, the country has been losing its population since the beginning of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict with Azerbaijan and its occupation of Azerbaijan territories in the early 1990s, which has followed by Armenia's economic degradation. The 3 Armenian population problems are simple: Birth rate, low. Migration, high. And population aging, growing. Immigration left a heavy mark on Armenia as people of reproductive age have left the country, quote unquote, says Artak Markosian, head of the Demography Department of the Armenian Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. The sharp population decline that started in the early 1990s can be explained by the combination of the economic downturn following the collapse of the Soviet Union, as well as the war in Karabakh, which, in addition to resulting in increased mortality figures, dead Armenians, stimulated immigration among those wishing to avoid compulsory military service. I need to comment on this reason for leaving Armenia. I lived through the Vietnam era here in the United States as a willing participant in the national defense of the United States. On my 18th birthday, the first day I could join the military without a parent's signature, I volunteered to serve in the United States Marine Corps. I put my college experience aside temporarily. I repeat, I volunteered. I do not appreciate anyone who refuses to serve their country anywhere, anytime, especially during wartime. So, if young Armenian men absconded, that's a legal word, to avoid military service anytime since Armenia became independent of the Soviet Union, I disapprove of those men and what they did. In the mid-1990s, Armenian conscripts generally had to serve in the armed forces for 18 months, while those who were deferred for college attendance and who received university degrees still had to serve for 12 months. By 1998, however, those terms already had to be increased to 24 and 18 months respectively, because of the decreasing pool of potential draftees, and shortly thereafter to a universal and mandatory 24-month term for all people. In late 2017, former president of Armenia, Serge Sargsyan, signed into law the requirement that any male university student seeking a draft deferment must sign a contract to later serve in the military for 36 months, 3 years. The law was met with huge student protests. Later, they resulted in thousands of potential draftees fleeing the country for the United States, for Paris, France, and for Moscow, Russia. Lastly, economics. Today, Armenia's living standards of the population's social welfare and level of development and many other indicators demonstrate a shaky economic and social foundation. Analyzing the statistics, it can be seen that the minimum wage and the average salary is the lowest in the region, lower than Azerbaijan, lower than the Republic of Georgia, lower than Turkey to the west, lower than any country in the region. Widely spread poverty in Armenia is also no secret. According to some reports, the poverty rate ranges between 20 and 30%. That's almost as high as Mexico's. Mexico has an Indian population that doesn't fit into modern economics or modern economy. Among youth, the unemployment rate is high and few decide to marry because they can't work at decent jobs and make decent money. Thus, among immigrants, many doubt they will ever return to Armenia. The issue of job creation in Armenia remains problematic. Yerevan, the capital, has a hard road ahead, says Armen Gregorian, co-founder and vice president of the Yerevan-based Center for Policy Studies and a Eurasia Democratic Security Network fellow. Moreover, for decades, the Armenian military political government failed to acknowledge its policy of occupying Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 other Azerbaijani districts as the core threat to national security and the origin of Armenia's demographic crisis. The latest illustration of this denial is when, despite the 2020 crisis, amid the pandemic, and the 27th of September, many observers declare the Armenian government's military forces violated international law and launched a large-scale attack on Azerbaijan from Azerbaijani national territory. Why? To geographically extend its occupation. Deliberately dragging its people into war over internationally recognized territories of Azerbaijan did not quite go well this time for Armenia, since the former is responding with skill, force, and a national will to liberate its territory village by village. Armenia cannot win this combat. It cannot hold territory any longer now that Azerbaijan has demonstrated its ability to win back its own territory. Armenia cannot fight much longer. It can't replace the weaponry, the tanks, trucks, and missiles it is using up unless the Russians come back into the scene in a major way. The Russians do not indicate they are interested in expanding their role. Other than France, no major European country is siding with Armenia. The United States is busy, and other than inviting the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan to Washington, D.C., it hasn't done much in that area other than providing Azerbaijan with military equipment dedicated to Azerbaijan's defense. While ANCA, ANCA, the Armenian National Committee of America, and others are screaming and whining and crying that the United States is giving money and equipment to Azerbaijan to make war. Patrol boats is what the United States gave Azerbaijan. Patrol boats, for example, for use in the Caspian Sea, which is a long way from Armenia. The only friends Armenia has seems to be the American National Committee of America, ANCA, the highly paid propagandists in Washington, D.C., and a handful of congressmen, American congressmen, they contribute campaign money to. Armenia is alone outside ANCA officially. That's our report from the front between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The fighting looks like it's going to continue for a while.